Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guests today are from Reach Out and Read, Connecticut, and our first guest is certainly a regular on the show. Her name is Christine Garber. She's the Executive Director, the Connecticut Executive Director, and we welcome you back to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
For those who have not seen the other shows that you've been on, tell us about Reach Out and Read. What is it?
So Reach Out and Read is a national nonprofit organization, and we partner with pediatricians. And basically what we do is we give out books to children at their well child visits, children 5 and under, and we educate parents about why it's so important to be reading to their children from birth. We focus on children growing up in low-income communities. So we're in like community health centers and outpatient clinics at the hospital. And the reason we focus on that population is because research has clearly shown that they are at the highest risk for reading failure. So we try to target them so that we can ensure that they develop the literacy skills they need to read once they enter kindergarten.
It's a great program. It's a great idea. Take me back, way back to when it was just decided that, something like this was needed, and how did it come about?
So Reach Out and Read was actually founded in 1989, so we just celebrated our 25-year anniversary. It was founded pretty locally in Boston City Hospital, by some pediatricians and some early literacy educators. Dr. Barry Zuckerman and Dr. Robert Needleman were the two doctors that really founded it, and it sort of happened over a argument in the waiting room. So they had been putting out gently used books for the children, in the waiting room. And
waiting room, they all have them, right?
They all have them, right? And so they would come in the next day and they'd be like, oh my gosh, we put these books out and they're gone. Every day they're gone. And so some people were saying, well, maybe we shouldn't put these books out anymore because they keep taking them. And then some people said, well, maybe they're taking them because they need them and they need books. And so that's sort of how it started. They realized that the population they were serving didn't have access to books. And also, obviously, as doctors, they realized that it's those first few years of life are so important. And maybe they could start helping parents learn how important it is for them to be reading to their children and develop their early literacy skills. So, I mean, it's pretty simple how it started, but it's also a pretty simple program.
Yeah.
Give out books, educate parents, but it's very powerful.
The way you explained it, now we understand why it was founded by doctors, or how doctors started, because you would think, well, what is the connection there with literacy and the doctors? But these were pediatricians, right?
These are pediatricians.
Right, and the kids are there. And
the kids are there.
Right.
But the beauty of it, and what's so brilliant, or one of the things that's so brilliant about Reach Out and Read is it is through doctors. So where do all the children go? Where do all children go? It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter if you're affluent or low-income family or what your race is. All children go to the doctor. So it provides us with near universal access to all children. And I don't know that there are many programs that can say that. We have access to pretty much all children, especially those high-risk children that really need our services. And those children may not have access to preschool programs. Those are the children that really probably aren't enrolled in preschool programs. This is sort of their preschool program. When
Right.
they go to the doctor, they get the book, the parents learn, it's important. Read 20 minutes every day to your child. If you're doing that, that is going to be a huge help in their development. And Dr. Roque, who will be on after me, she can speak to that a little bit more. But yeah, and that's what's so brilliant. The doctors also volunteer their time. So by using the existing healthcare system, it keeps our overhead costs low. We're not building buildings.
Right.
We don't have...
The books can go to them wherever they are, whatever they're doing, right?
The books go right to them. They volunteer their time. So the doctors aren't getting paid. They know how important literacy is. They know it's important to their patients, to the families. So they volunteer their time. So again, that keeps our costs very low. And we have so much access to the parents and the children.
The only problem with the doctor's office being the preschool is that would mean that there's something the kids have to be in the doctor's office all the time. So something's wrong, whether it's chicken pox or sprained ankle, scraped knee, or whatever.
yes,
but this is kids. So.
Well, yes and no. Our program is actually, it focuses on the well child visits. So children go to their doctor. So children go to the doctor when they're sick, but they also go when they're well, and they're called well child visits. So between the ages of 6 months and 5 years, there's about 10 well child visits. And then between birth and 6 months is another 4. So there's about 14 visits between birth and 5 years. So they give out the new books for our program and that advice at the well child visits. So typically they're healthy. However, when the kids do come in for sick visits, we try to have gently used books so that they still get a book. But we do focus on those well child visits because those are sort of scheduled so that we have repeated access with the families. So like a relationship is developed, obviously, usually between the parents and the pediatrician. And that's the other thing that makes our program so powerful is pediatricians are usually respected. They're usually, if the parent's going to listen to anyone, it's probably going to be their pediatrician.
And if a doctor can work with a kid and have the kid not freak out and be well behaved, then you want to go to that doctor all the time, right?
You absolutely do. Although I have heard that sometimes books have been thrown by the children.
Do they have to be soft covered because of that, or what? Yeah.
Well, we give out a lot of board books like this because we're serving such young children, but I don't think that happens often. But I have heard that once in a while a book has been thrown.
So these at-risk kids that maybe not are going to preschool, they're kind of behind the curve already. They already need to be in catch-up mode, right?
Unfortunately, that's the statistic. Of course, there are some that aren't, but statistically, these are the kids, if they're not going to preschool, that are behind. And it's usually the low-income population, and there's a lot of reasons for it. Parents are working, they might be working 2 or 3 jobs and simply don't have the time. They may not have the resources to purchase books. They may not have transportation to go to the library to get free books. They may struggle with reading. They may not have liked to read when they were a child. They may simply not know it's important to be reading. So that's where the doctor is critical, and that's where the relationship between the doctor and the parent is critical, because if you just give a book but they don't know it's important to be reading, then the book could just sit on the shelf. Right. And if you then educate the parents but don't give them the book, so now they know this information, but they might not have any books. So we do both. We give them the book, but we also tell them why it's important. And it's not just the book. The doctors also talk about just communication, singing to your child as you're at the grocery store with them, pointing to things and asking questions, even if they can't answer. They can answer in their own language, in their own babble, which is very important. Yeah. It's very important in the language development. So yes, these kids really need the books, but the parents really need to know. I mean, that's sort of what we're doing, right? We're changing parental behavior because a 6-month-old can't read to themselves, And it's also, and Dr. Roque will talk about this, it's also that bonding, having the child on your lap for 15 minutes. Maybe you've worked, 2 jobs and you come home and you're exhausted. But if you can just put your child on your lap for 15 minutes and read to them, that's such a great bonding experience, and it's relaxing even if you're tired.
The tough part is getting the parents out of their regular routine, which for them might be, okay, maybe they'll start dinner, but maybe they're so exhausted they'll plop down and turn the TV on. Or use the TV as the babysitter for the child while they get things done. And then you get into that cycle of not getting to the book,
And routines are really, really important, and pediatricians talk a lot about routines, for other reasons. But we did recently change our program a little bit since I've been on this show. Our program always started at 6 months, and we decided to start it really at that newborn visit and really start talking to the parents that early because of early brain development. I mean, it really starts at birth. So our program is really at the beginning, and one of the reasons is for those habits, because once the baby's born, if you can start those habits early, it's so much easier than getting into a bad habit, and then, I mean, we all have bad habits, and then trying to break a bad habit. So it is exactly what you said. If we can get them into that habit of reading every day or 5 days a week, right from the get-go, then you don't have to break it.
Now, and you should, we need to define, proper reading too. Does the newspaper count? Just them grabbing the newspaper count as reading?
It does count as reading.
Does, reading online, does that count as reading? I mean, there are other, what's happening to newspapers in general these days. But it's not necessarily going away, but it's transforming into the digital age, into online.
It
And
is.
you've got strong thoughts about that too.
So when the children are young, 2 months old, 6 months old, and they may not really be, they may not realize a whole story. You can read anything to them. You can read the paper to them because they're getting those language
In the
skills.
fourth inning
Right.
last night, little Johnny, what a shot to the left field wall.
So what's important at those really young ages is the bonding. So the child, you're spending time with the child. The child is with you, cuddled up with you, and you might be reading your book. As they get older, it might not be appropriate language for
Right.
them. So you want to switch to something that's more appropriate.
More rated G.
Right, more G-rated. The thing about books is you're going to get that rich language that you don't find anywhere else. So we do encourage singing and nursery rhymes and just communication. But if you're reading, and especially as the children get older, you're going to get vocabulary that we don't use in normal, conversation. And so that's yet another advantage to actually reading a book. And I think we've talked about this before, reading above a child's grade reading
Is
level.
it like challenging them?
Challenging them. So, our program goes to 5 through that 5th grade, that 5th year child visit. So we're really preparing kids to read. We're not necessarily teaching kids to read. We're preparing them to read.
Right. They're listening. Maybe they're asking questions.
Oh, I hope. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
There should be that. And so parents are reading. But what happens often is once children can read independently around 3rd grade, we stop reading to them.
And expect them to just kind of keep going?
Because they can read to themselves.
But do they really want to?
Yeah.
Maybe they'd rather play a video game.
Well, maybe they would. But if you continue, so even if they are great readers, even if they will read and are happy to read, if you continue to read aloud to them, but above their reading level, think of all the vocabulary that you're going to be exposing them to. And it's so great. I mean, it's something I wish we had done more of. So, I mean, this is outside the scope of our program.
But then they're ahead of the curve instead of behind it, right?
Exactly.
The other thing that I thought of,
Right.
you never have to stop reading. Maybe there would be bigger words, but you're never going to get to the point like with their math homework where there'll come a time where you won't be able to help them
max out,
anymore.
right.
They know more than you, but reading, you could just go on and on with it.
Well, and so if there's a word you don't know,
Right.
so great.
Yeah.
You look it up and you model good behavior. This is what happens when there's a word you don't know. You look it up and you teach your child that, and then you learn the word together, and what's better than that?
You know what the worst thing that happened to reading is? Texting, because everything is an acronym.
I know.
You rolled your eyes, you're like, oh,
and
yeah, and spelling, and everything is U, with the letter U instead of
Right.
YOU. It's because of character limitation, but it's really destroyed, proper English, I guess you could say, right?
Spelling, a lot of schools don't even teach spelling anymore because we have
Spell check. Yeah.
But right, I mean, spelling is really, really important. And yes, texting. Kids struggle with spelling as it is. Texting makes that so much worse.
And that's what they're really
So
on a lot
much
when they
worse.
get older. When they start
Exactly.
enjoying their
Right.
phone. Which is another
Exactly.
thing that the kids read on. Granted, it's Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, but
But what they're not getting is that rich language.
Right.
These are older children, older than our program, but they're not getting the rich.
I can tell you, there's no rich language on Twitter at all.
No. So that's where the book
Right.
itself is important. And there are, geez, I've seen them, lists that will say, books compared to newspapers, compared to television shows, how many of that rich language you're getting in literature versus a newspaper versus a TV show. And as you go, it gets lower and lower.
Do you mind if a book is if it's in a digital form, if it's on a Kindle or an iPad, or obviously you'd still prefer paper and pages turning? And
right. For our age group.
Yeah.
So for kids 5 and under, well,
kids are messing with iPads these days.
I know, but little kids need to touch things. They need to explore. They need to put it in their mouths. That's why we have the board books. I would not recommend the digital books for the younger ages.
Do you remember the story? I think I told you last time you were on. They handed a little child, this is where we are in the world, they handed a little child a book, and the child tried to swipe it like he was using an iPad. He knew about the iPad more than he knew about the book. That's crazy.
This is what our doctors do. They'll hand a book to the child and basically see what they do with it. And so that's very telling. If you hand a child a book upside down, so say a 2-year-old, which you would expect a 2-year-old would know,
to turn it
what
right
a book,
side.
right. So if you handed it to a 2-year-old and they didn't turn it upside down and they looked at it or they just put it down, the doctor knows that child's not being read to, is not being exposed to books. And certainly if they start swiping it, they know that they're
You got to lay off the iPad is what you really need to do.
Exactly. So the book is also used in the exam room as a developmental a tool to see how the child is developing. So they'll be looking for different things. By 2, they should be able to turn the book correctly. Do they have the pincer grasp? Can they turn, or fine motor skills? Can they turn the pages? Do they look at their parent and read this to me? And that joint attention. So they use the book to talk about why it's so important to be reading and the literacy part, but they also use it as a developmental surveillance tool to get information.
We are way over our time on this segment, actually, but it was so fascinating because we learned so much. I want you to give the website out for people to go and learn more.
So www.reachoutandread.org and then /Connecticut for our Connecticut information.
Christine Garber, she's the Connecticut Executive Director for Reach Out and Read. Pleasure having you on the show, as always.
Thanks so much.
We'll take a short break and come right back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay right there. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest for this segment is Dr. Cynthia Roque. She is the Reach Out and Read medical provider and also a Connecticut Advisory Board member. That is a lot to fit on a business card, by the way. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
So what does that mean exactly, the medical provider and just basically a board member? What does that mean?
So first and foremost, I'm a pediatrician seeing patients in the clinical setting. And as part of Reach Out and Read, we have an advisory board that is a group of people who have come together to help the cause, pretty much, help us to organize our fundraising efforts and to help spread the program throughout the state. So as part of that, I serve on the board as one of the advisory members. So
now let's get it from a doctor's perspective. We learned a lot from Christine about that relationship, that bonding that should start very early between the pediatrician and the child, but really eventually have it transfer over to the parents so they can take it. But talk about it from your perspective.
Absolutely. So Christine explained it really well. The first 1,000 days of a child's life is critical in their brain development, and doctors get to be exposed to what is going on between birth and the 5 years of life through well child visits. And so the most important thing is that when a child comes in for a regular well visit, we're observing the child and the parent interaction. As doctors, we use those moments to be able to figure out what type of connection, what type of bond does this child have with the parent, what types of things we can do to help parents, and we call that anticipatory guidance. Throughout all the well child visits, we, as providers, provide anticipatory guidance for the parent and teach them, okay, at 2 months of age, this is what your child is doing, and this is what they can do at 4 months of age, and so on and so forth. And so by not just observing, but going over the types of things that their child can do at those visits, we learn what to teach the parents and what the parents have to look forward to in the future with each visit.
You know what's really interesting that I'm learning? You're a pediatrician, but the observation that you're doing with the parent and the child and their bond, there's a lot of psychology involved in this, isn't there?
Absolutely.
I mean, do you have to mess around with that in medical school too? I mean, is that part of training when especially with what you're doing?
I think that in pediatrics it is,
Yeah.
definitely. When we learn about child development and what the child is supposed to be doing at each stage in development, we learn that the critical component to a child's learning is their interaction with their parent. Parents are the first teachers for any child. And so when we learn about the child's health, we realized health is not just immunizations and checking the ears and doing those. It really is composed of, the child's well-being centered around their education, their social emotional development, their ability to cope with different things in life, and their social situation. So their home situation is really, really crucial on what the child is going to learn and how that child is going to be able to transform that as an adult.
You may have just insulted all your ear, nose, and throat colleagues, but
No,
I'm kidding. But
it's not just, it's a whole component.
But it's interesting, what you were describing. It's kind of an intangible. It's necessary and it's important, but how do you really define it? And it may not have been that long ago. There really wasn't like a really good definition of that. How you describe interaction and those initial learning abilities and steering them in the right direction and teaching the parent the proper way to start the child's life, basically, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we learned throughout medical school and residency that one of the best ways to understand health and disease is by actually going to the person's home, because we have maybe about 8 to 15 minutes per patient.
Right.
And there's a lot to learn about someone and figure out in about 8 to 15 minutes. So, with pediatrics, one of the better ways to do it is just to not only ask the parents, how are things going at home, or do you have a book, and how do you interact with your child with this book, but observing it, because of the fact that we don't have that much time to ask all those necessary questions that we need to formulate all the information that we need to go forth with figuring out what we can do for this family. So by just handing the book to the child, we see that the child is interested in the book, knows that it's a book, takes the book, and whether we give them the book upside down or backwards, we can see if the child has ever been exposed to a book or not. We can see, if we hand a 4-year-old a book and they just seem disinterested in it, we see they don't have drive, motivation, and then we, at that moment, have the opportunity to intervene.
Right.
So if we had not observed that, it's difficult, because when we ask a parent, how do you read to your child at home, or oh yeah, I read every day, we don't really see where that child's level is. And so that's why this program is wonderful for that in a short amount of time for doctors.
A person will act very differently going to a doctor's office than they might in their own house.
Absolutely.
They're more relaxed, their guard is down a little bit. Like you said, you have more time. Let me ask you this. Let's say you do discover that there's some things that are lacking and you do need to intervene. How do you do it in such a way that is, you're not offending the parent, but you need to let them know that action needs to be taken? It's for their own good and the child's own good.
Well, there's a number of ways of doing that, and it all depends on where you are in your relationship with that parent, right? So for a primary care provider to know a family, they've already established that trust with that family after multiple visits. But if I have a new parent and I hand the child the book and the parent just takes the book and puts it away, then I use that moment and say, oh, can you give that book back to the patient, to your child? I want to see what they're doing with the book. And when they do something that's wonderful, for example, if a 6-month-old goes and puts the book in their mouth, most parents tend to say, oh, no, don't do that. We don't want to, destroy the book. I say, no, that's wonderful. That's absolutely, your 6-month-old is so smart. That's exactly what he's supposed to be doing with it. That praise for how well he's doing is actually a reflection of parenting, and so it kind of makes the parent feel proud.
Yeah.
So it's not that negative, oh, don't do this, you shouldn't be doing that. It's, no, this is wonderful. So, I think we switch around, and, most providers know how to do that. Focus on the positive and focus on what the child can do, and then we can say, by this visit, he should be able to do this. And by reading to him every day at home, we can see that at the next visit. So it's almost kind of like a challenge.
Yeah.
I want to see that you've been reading with your child. By the next time he comes in, I want to see that he's actually opening the book and turning the pages. And so I think that the parent and the child have that opportunity to interact, so that when they come back for their next visit, they see the improvement, and now the parent can actually take ownership of what the child has learned.
I can definitely hear the passion in your voice. It seems like you love it. You love what you do. It's probably very rewarding for you. And we learned a lot today. Unfortunately, I wish we had more time. Dr. Cynthia Roque, she's a medical doctor. She's the medical provider for Reach Out and Read and the Connecticut Advisory. She's a board member, basically. So her input is definitely appreciated, and we learned a lot today too. Before we wrap it up, I want to mention to go to the website, because there are a lot of events coming up. Reach Out and Read Connecticut events. So what is the website for people to go and learn more?
So there's a national website, which is reachoutandread.org, but if you want to localize it to Connecticut's events, make sure that you use reachoutandread.org/Connecticut.
That is where we want you to go. You can see this show and many others on our YouTube site. Until next time, I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Take care.
Thank you.